Knowing when and even if you're ovulating is a secret superpower that most women are not tapping into. Most of us don't really care about if or when we're ovulating unless we're trying to conceive. When we're trying to get pregnant, we care a lot about ovulation, and we need to know exactly when we're ovulating to know when to have intercourse. But when we're outside of that phase in our lives, when we're not trying to conceive, maybe we're trying to even avoid getting pregnant, or we're way beyond that phase and it's not even on our radar, we don't think that ovulation is that important anymore. But in fact, it is the secret key to your cycle. It is the thing that is driving your cycle. And so knowing when and if you're ovulating can be so powerful to understanding what your hormones are doing, understanding what your body is doing, and if it needs something different. Today, we're going to talk about how to know if you're ovulating, when you're ovulating, some signs of not ovulating or getting good ovulation, and why we really care about this, again, outside of trying to get pregnant. So why is ovulation so central to our menstrual cycle? For one, it drives progesterone production. We need to ovulate to have progesterone. And this is one thing that we see become a really big problem when we're in perimenopause and menopause. When we stop ovulating, we don't have progesterone. We become really imbalanced, often having high estrogen first without progesterone, and then they both go by the wayside and both get low. And we have a lot of symptoms that come up from that. So knowing about this process, really knowing if you're ovulating and if you're ovulating well, like if the quality of your eggs and follicles are good and you're getting a really good production of progesterone, it's super important to understand when it comes to your mood, your metabolism, and so much more. Anovulatory cycles are really common in PCOS and perimenopause, as well as post-birth control. When you're coming off of birth control and regaining a cycle, it can be really common to have really irregular cycles that are anovulatory, meaning you're not ovulating, but you're getting a bleed. So again, understanding if this is happening to you or not can really help you unlock what your body needs to best support your overall well-being and your hormonal health. What are some of the biggest myths about ovulation timing? So I want to clear these up first. One, we don't always ovulate on day 14. So usually when you're hearing someone talk about cycle days, a typical cycle is 28 days and ovulation is on day 14. But I see a lot of women trip up with this because they just assume that they're ovulating on that day and don't really understand when their body is ovulating or if it is ovulating, and understanding their own body's signs. That is a frame of reference. That is a general estimate, but most women are not ovulating on day 14. Great if you are, but most women are not. And so understanding when you're actually ovulating can really give you so much more insight. Also, you can have a period and still not be ovulating. I mentioned this. Typically, we're having a bleed or a period if we're ovulating, but we can have a bleed without ovulating. And so again, especially in perimenopause or PCOS, just having a bleed doesn't mean that you absolutely ovulated before that. So understanding the signs and really getting that insight into your body can be really imperative to know if that's happening or not. And apps can be helpful, but they don't always give you the most accurate information. They cannot predict or confirm ovulation just based on dates. So really understanding, again, your own body signs, and also maybe using a little bit more information like basal body temperature tracking if you're unclear. So again, a lot of the apps, they really vary in quality. Some are great quality, some are very poor quality, but something even good quality, like something like Natural Cycles, using an Aura ring is great, or Temp Drop, something that's actually getting your temperature. It's going to give you much more information and be able to predict things much more accurately. But again, if you're not putting information into it, then it's not going to give you an accurate feedback. For example, if you're just logging when your period is, it's not going to be able to tell you with certainty when or if you're ovulating just based on that. And then to how to actually know if you're ovulating. So again, I mentioned some signs. One, basal body temperature tracking can be really helpful here. So, when tracking your temperature, basically what this is taking your temperature in the morning, first thing before you get up or move around or do things that raise up your body temperature. This does depend a little bit on how your quality of sleep was the night before, if you've been drinking alcohol, which kind of raises your body temperature. So there are some variables, but basically your basal body temperature is that core basal temperature of your body that actually changes throughout your cycle. After ovulation, it goes up thanks to progesterone, which warms up your body, gets everything ready for pregnancy, if that's what you want. And that looks like a temperature shift, what we call it, when you're tracking at least a half a degree in Fahrenheit in your temperature higher than your baseline. So typically in a chart, what it looks like is maybe some variable temperatures or lower temperatures. And all of a sudden you ovulate and it either your temperature starts to climb or it goes up and then should stay up until you get your period. So that can be really helpful to see that information. You also have signs from your body just every day of where you are in your cycle. And one of my favorite ones here is cervical mucus. So cervical mucus changes throughout your cycle depending on your hormones. It tends to start getting a little bit more creamy and abundant when you have estrogen on board. And in the couple of days before ovulation, we have what's called egg white cervical mucus. This is basically named because it looks like egg whites. It looks really stretchy. You should be able to stretch it between your fingers and have it be clear and stringy and not easily breaking. That is egg white cervical mucus or fertile type cervical mucus. This is the cervical mucus that is able to allow sperm through your cervix. Again, thinking biologically of the purpose of ovulating, getting pregnant, that's what it's for. But this can also be a really great sign that you're getting close to ovulation or that you're ovulating. This isn't 100% because you can have the sign and your body doesn't actually ovulate. Some women, for example, with PCOS, their body might be trying to ramp up to ovulate and it's not exactly happening. So they might have a little bit of egg whites, a couple of days, it goes away. A little bit more, it goes away. But this is, again, a great sign to look for and pair with other sources of information to see if that is actually happening. You can also do LH strips, or also known as OPK or ovulation predictor kits. Basically what these are is testing for the hormone LH, which is our brain telling our ovaries to ovulate. And this spikes the day before, on average, before ovulation. So again, about 24 hours before ovulation or in that time frame, we get an LH spike. So you can be doing these strips, you pee on the strip, see if it's positive or not, and that can give you also some information about if and when you're ovulating. Again, not 100%. You can have that without ending up actually ovulating, but it's great to pair that with these other pieces of information. There also are progesterone urine tests. It's testing a hormone metabolite from progesterone called PDG, and that can be a great resource now too at home using one of those test strips. And it basically has to be, you have to have a progesterone level of a certain point for it to be positive, which may depend a little bit on the test, but usually it's about 3 or 4 that your progesterone level needs to be for it to show up on this test and say, yes, it's positive, you have ovulated. Now, that doesn't mean your progesterone level is maybe necessarily ideal for pregnancy, but it is good confirmation that yes, you have ovulated, because again, you don't have progesterone unless you've ovulated. So that is great confirmation to look at afterwards to make sure. So with all those things together, you can be 100% certain that this is happening between basal body temperatures, your egg white cervical mucus, as well as some of the test strips. Now, some other piece of information that I love to talk about, this can be a little bit harder to tell, especially if you're a beginner, but also great pieces of information is looking at your cervix, feeling your cervix. I guess you can't look at your cervix, your own cervix, unless you have some technology on board. But feeling your cervix can also be a great source of information. The acronym here is SHOW. So it's soft, high, open, and wet. So the wetness piece is what we just talked about, the cervical mucus. The softness is actually the texture of your cervix, because again, your cervix changes throughout your cycle depending on the hormones. So it will be softer around ovulation and feel more like your lips pursed, like you're going to make a kissy face, and then feel your lips. It's going to feel more like that rather than your chin or your nose. So you can go and compare and say, oh, okay, that's about how it should feel, and start to get familiar with your cervix and how it feels. The height of your cervix is another piece of information. So basically, if you were to insert a finger in your vagina, how close your cervix feels. Again, this can sound really weird. You're like, oh my gosh, this is actually, it's like changing in position, but it actually does. And as you become familiar with this, can be another piece of information. And just insert a finger. If it is really hard to reach, it's high. If it's really close and you're like, wow, I can feel it really easily, it's on the lower side. And again, it depends on your body, but you can start to have that as a piece of information. The openness, arguably the hardest thing to feel, but also your cervix becomes a little bit more open during ovulation. So it'll feel like, if you imagine a donut, like one of those mini donuts, and feeling that, it might feel a little bit more open, where you can feel a little dot in the middle, versus not being able to feel that when it'd be more closed. This can also change if you've had kids before. But another piece of information, if you're really wanting to just see what your body is telling you, these can be great things to do, and it doesn't have to be hard. So looking for cervical mucus when you're just sitting down to use the restroom before you pee, wiping really quickly, seeing if there's anything on the toilet paper, can be a great way of doing it. When you're in the shower, maybe that's a better time to feel your cervix and just say, okay, where do I stand today? Oh yeah, it's feeling this way. Again, it's giving you data. It's giving you information about what your body looks like on a given day, what it's doing. And so you can feel really confident of where you are if you are not clear and you're not sure. Again, you don't have to be doing all of these things. Most women do not have to be doing all of these things regularly, but I think it's great to know these tools to be able to use them. Because if one day all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, wait, it's day 15. Usually I ovulate on day 12 and I haven't had any of those signs. What's going on? Like, you have real-time information that your body is changing or something's off. And that is so incredibly valuable if you're really trying to support your longevity, your fertility, your hormone health, and just everything. To talk a little bit more about signs that you're not ovulating. So again, this can be helpful if you're at the moment right now, you're like, I have no idea if I'm ovulating or not. This can be helpful to understand. One is if you're having really bad PMS, this could be a sign. If you're having really irregular cycles. So a typical cycle length is about 25 to 31 days. If you're outside of that window, you're probably having irregular cycles. Or if your cycles are going like 25, 31, 25, 27, they're all over the map, they're not consistent about the same days within 1 to 2 days of each other, then that's a sign that you're having irregular cycles. And that doesn't necessarily guarantee you're not ovulating, but it definitely could be a sign that either you're ovulating at really irregular times, which isn't necessarily a good thing, or you're just not ovulating and your bleed is happening whenever it's going to happen. You may also have different symptoms in different cycles, meaning maybe one cycle you're having no PMS, no pain before your period or anything. The next cycle you're having horrible PMS, horrible, or like hot flashes, night sweat, something like that. And it's changing from one cycle to the next. That could be a sign that you're not ovulating or not ovulating consistently. This is something that can happen in perimenopause, when the ovulation is starting to drop off and some of your cycles are anovulatory and all of a sudden they're really long. They come with different symptoms, like those vasomotor symptoms, which are hot flashes, night sweats, maybe like brain fog, fatigue, rather than PMS or something like that. They're changing. You may also have short luteal phases, and this kind of opens up a whole other conversation. Another reason why it's important to track your ovulation. But if you're having a really short time between ovulation and your period, that could be a sign that you're not ovulating. I guess I should say that differently. To have that, if you're having ovulation to your period, obviously you're ovulating. But if you think that you're ovulating a certain day and your period came way sooner than that, that could be a sign. Say it ended up happening that your period came 3 days later. It's like, no, you probably did not actually ovulate. To put that a different way, you could, if you actually did ovulate and you still had a short luteal phase, that phase between ovulation and your period, ideally that's 12 to 14 days. If it's happening much sooner than that, you're getting your period maybe 8 days after ovulation, not the best sign. That's usually a sign that your progesterone production wasn't great. Not a great thing if you're trying to conceive, but also if you're just struggling with, again, some of those things like PMS, really painful periods, heavy periods. That's not something we want to see. We want to make sure that your progesterone production is fantastic. So some good things to look at. You might also have spotting in between periods. That can vary. That can sometimes be with a normal ovulatory cycle. But if you're having a lot of spotting, again, it could be a warning sign that your progesterone production isn't good or something else is going wrong. So some things to watch out for while you're also learning the signs and starting to track your ovulation. So let's summarize some key takeaways. So for one, if you're unclear on if and when you're ovulating, please start tracking your signs and your cycles. Again, apps can be really helpful here, but they do vary in quality. So I usually recommend something like Natural Cycles, Kindara, Glow. These are some great quality ones. And again, ideally tracking your basal body temps with when your period is happening, when symptoms are happening, to get the most information. You don't have to if you're completely overwhelmed by the thought of tracking your temperature, but it can give a lot of information and good confirmation about ovulation. And again, it can be something simple like an Oura ring. I am a huge fan of the Oura ring for other reasons also, but it makes cycle tracking super easy. Your basal body temperature is tracked on its own without you having to think about it. So that's a great tool, and that pairs with natural cycles. You can also use something like an Apple Watch or Temp Drop, which is an armband. There are other ones also. So that can be really helpful. Or you could just use a very simple, cheap thermometer. Actually, if you sign up for Natural Cycles, you get one for free if you use my code, which I'll put in the show notes. But also you can get one for like $10 on Amazon. That's really cheap, but just make sure it's a basal body temperature thermometer. And you just take your temperature every morning and log it into your app. It can be super simple. And again, even just doing that for a couple of cycles can be really helpful to really understand if and when you're ovulating. And then work with a provider. This is not necessary for every single person, but especially if you're really struggling to understand, especially if you're not ovulating and you don't understand why, then please don't wait to get help, because it's so often that we try to do this on our own. We're trying to figure this out. We feel like we need to know it all ourselves, but in reality, you could end up wasting a lot of time and have a lot of stress that goes along with this. So if you're seeing any of these signs with any of the things I talked about, if it just didn't feel 100% clear or you're having some of those symptoms, please reach out to a provider and work with someone so you can just get the support you need. Most likely you'll learn so much more than you didn't even realize you would about your body, and it's really worth its weight in gold to do that now, sooner than later, to really start to understand what your body is doing and start to support it in the right way. If you need help with this, if you don't have a provider already, reach out to me. Schedule a discovery call with me, which is a free call where we get to talk about your particular situation, what we might want to look for, next steps, and how it'd look to work together. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need some more support. That is what I do. It's why I have this podcast, because I really love supporting women and really educating them about how they can understand their own bodies and feel really empowered and confident on their hormone journey.